Hello, everyone. This is Robert Aceves, and we're starting another episode of mindfitpodcast. And I have Neil Babins. Hi, Neil. How you doing today?
I'm doing very well. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. A little tired. I went to bed quite late last night because I was finishing my meditation, but happy that I finally finished it again. And so far, so good. So, how was your week?
My week was good, very busy also. A lot of things going on, with people. So, I mean, I have back-to-back work and it's like almost nonstop. So I try to go away on the weekends, do some road trips, reset, recharge, but
Good.
it was good. The air quality is starting to improve a little bit so we could actually breathe. I had windows open at one point and I started getting some headaches. I'm like, that's probably not a good idea. So I closed them,
Good.
you know.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it seems like everything is opening up again. Like a lot of businesses are back, allowing people indoors, and, people seem more excited about things reopening. Movie theaters are now open. I mean, so many things happening. I just really hope that we don't get back, into a quarantine soon. So we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, we last time we opened up, that's when they closed back up again. So hopefully, the spikes going down is a new trend. I mean, yeah, I'm really a lot of people are really reaching, their own wits end, and people are discussing, moving into a new normal, and what that's going to look like, and it's just causing a lot of stress. So I think it's about time we finally found out,
Hmm.
the next step is, yeah. So
Yeah.
I didn't even know that movie theaters are open now. I didn't know that.
Hmm. Yeah. And, with all this quarantine stuff happening, a lot of people, I feel like a lot of my clients are starting to feel frustrated. And, I mean, they've been frustrated for a while, but what I mean though is just being home kind of makes you start thinking a lot and, come up with a lot of, that's why a lot of conspiracy theories are getting, a lot of, momentum, because people just want to see things, believe things. And so today we're going to talk about, the mind versus the spirit. And when is it that we're thinking of things and making things up in our minds? And when is it that we are actually experiencing some kind of paranormal activity in our surroundings? No, right? Did I say that right?
You did. Yeah, you did. Or maybe it was a spirit talking for you,
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just someone talking through you. Yeah. Well, yeah, the paranormal activity we'll discuss today, sensed presences, because a lot
Hmm.
of people from along a spectrum feel that they've seen ghosts or apparitions, felt them, experienced them, to all the way to more subtle and mild, which is probably more in my case, to be honest, where I've sensed a presence or I've sensed something being there, not sure if there is or not, especially when I'm in, and this is actually shown to be evidence based, when I'm in a place that's quieter, externally quieter, like say up in the mountains, where there's not a lot of external stressors going on or external stimuli going on. We tend to go internal when that happens. And when we go internal, there tends to be more of a possibility of perception of things that our mind is telling us ought to be there because we don't hear or see anything too much. Nothing's changing. And when things become stagnant or isolated, hello, like everybody these days, right? And also, apparently, when things, for example, when oxygen levels are low, or altitudes get higher, or temperatures drop, like out in space, there tends to
Hmm.
be, a lot of that kind of thing. So, sensed presences or sensed perception as opposed to what's actually there, and then we can bring it all the way to the paranormal, parapsychologists, and the theory of ghosts, and sort of examine what's really going on in the mind and or spirit, and whether we're really perceiving things. When somebody dies, for example, we tend to want them to still be there, have memories, unresolved issues, or wounds, or traumas, or completion. We want to be complete. Or sometimes we just miss their company, we miss their guidance, we miss their presence. you know um, we then face our own mortality, all kinds of things like that are very human, so we tend to want to bring it back. And I knew one person once, a long time ago, who lost his dad about a decade prior to when I met him. And he would refer to his dad as spirit. Every time he had a question he couldn't answer, he'd look up, open his hands, and say spirit, and then ask him the question as if he was talking to his dad. Um, yeah, and it was actually quite interesting because he did work in or things like tarot card readings and whatnot, and psychic energy and all that kind of those kinds of fields. So but he believed it, and as far as he was concerned, his father was still with him. You know, sensed perception, sensed presence. Can we argue that, or should we even argue that, you know,
Yeah.
whether it's true or not, like what's true, right? It's true for him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think science doesn't believe in this, in the spirit, because I don't think it's because it doesn't exist. I think it does exist, but I think they haven't found a way to measure it. And I think that's the reason why they say that it doesn't exist. But it doesn't mean that in the future they're not going to figure out a way to measure that. Now, from my own experience, I tell you, I had one of my good dear friends who died a couple years ago, and I was there until the last moment she passed away. And I think I've mentioned this before. And just sitting there watching her, the moment that she left her body, you could totally see her spirit leave. And then after she died, it was like an empty shell. There was nothing there, and you couldn't feel her essence anymore. It was gone. And so I feel like there's something there, from my own experience as well. Like, through meditation and meditating for a long time, I experienced a lot of times, leaving my body. And, there's been a few times when I felt like I was going to die, from leaving my body and feeling so good out there that I didn't want to come back. And
Mhm.
so, but at the same time, there's doctors that talk about the pineal gland, which is this part of our brain that is the part that makes us feel like we're leaving our bodies, and that we're, meeting God and doing all this, things that are so out there. But it's there's so much to debate here, because I feel like, we've all had experiences, right? We've all experienced some kind of thing sometimes where we perceive things, we feel a presence, or, I've had tons of clients talk about that, where they see their parents, or they feel, some kind of a message from somebody from the other world, and things like that. So,
Mhm. Yeah, and I can't, talk about clients specifically, but I
mhm,
can say that I've had the same experience where some clients along the spectrum really believe they've crossed over through meditation
mhm,
or had near-death experiences, like you say. And it is true that many of them are described in a very similar manner. So it would make sense
mhm,
that there's a pineal gland or something biological that or neurological that is, consistent throughout experiences because it's described the same way. And the experience is described very much the same way. I've had
right.
clients who have said that they've crossed over. But even for myself, who tends to believe a little bit more toward quantified science, I myself, I rent cabins a lot, intending to buy one day. Um,
Mhm,
and with my friend a few couple of months ago, we were in Big Bear, and we had rented a specific cabin, and both of us said almost at the same time, "There's something in this house.
mhm,
There's someone here." And yes, we were in lower oxygen, higher altitude, slightly colder weather, very quiet. Not a lot of stimulation, a big cabin with just two people in it, so that all the factors were there. And it was in a strange environment. It was a particularly strange cabin too, because all these cabins are designed very interestingly. I almost like on purpose to be weird. And there was but it was a friendly. We both said both friendly, cautious, but flirtatious sort of female type of energy that was watching us and watching me from the back as I'd leave the bathroom or my bedroom. And I just turn over my shoulder as if there's something there. Now, I don't know if there really was or not, but it was a sensed presence. So something is real about it. And then we rented another cabin, same friend, a couple weeks later in Idlewild, and nothing. We were like, this place is barren. There's nothing here. My friend said, yeah, that's why I don't like it. That's why I
mhm,
don't trust it, because there's nothing here. So anyway, there we did have that sensed presence as well. And I like what you said, because it's true in terms of science. Whenever we can't measure something, whenever we can't prove something, whenever we can't
mhm,
do tests that check for reliability, like meta-analysis or repetition of trials, we tend to not trust it. But when you look, just I'll say very briefly, when you look at the universe, when you look at just space
mhm.
and all that we do seem to know about what's possible out there, dimensions and different dimensions and billions of light years away, what does that even mean? If there's something billions of light years away, 186,000 miles per second times billions of years, by the time it reaches us, it doesn't even exist anymore.
Mhm.
And that is in itself philosophically sort of evidence for the fact that there could be something there that's not there. Because we're
Yeah.
even when we see stars, we're seeing it from 2,000 years ago. So if we're seeing something in a, you know, if we can actually see something billions of light years away or remnants of it, it's not there anymore. or whatever we're seeing has been, it's been billions of years since it's been there. So we can't possibly understand dimensions and how things cross through dimensions and whatnot the way that we think that we can. So I leave it very open to possibility. When people say, "Do you believe in ghosts?" Even though I'm more scientific, I'm like, I cannot tell you one way or another that it's true or not true.
Yeah.
So
And
yeah.
then you mentioned people who've had, near death experiences. There's so many stories that are so similar, where they see a light and they experience certain things that are very similar. So either that's our biological way of dying or, we really are experiencing something. And then there's also, people who've been doing research on past lives and reincarnation and things like that. And there has been some evidence, but it seems like a lot of people just don't want to believe that. They don't want to, feel like that we come back. And in some ways, that to some people feels painful. Like we don't want to feel that way. But I tell you this, and this is really interesting that physics is now coming to this new realization that the Big Bang theory, where it was just the beginning of the universe and the universe is expanding constantly, they're saying that it's getting to a point where it's going to reach a limit and then it's going to start going back and it's going to implode again and then it's going to have another big bang. So it's going to be like the big bang and the big bang and the big bang over and over and over again, like a like something that keeps repeating itself, which is
Mm,
something that Buddhism has been talking about for 2500 years, that we have this thing where we keep coming back and it's constant cycle of lives over and over. And so I feel like someday we're also going to realize that this is all true. We've had the same people in our lives over and over, just like Groundhog Day. That movie to me is just amazing because it
it's up a
feels that
lot.
way. Yeah,
Yeah.
it feels that way. Like you have all these problems in life and same people, and then if you don't fix your problem with one person, then later you have another person that's going to come back with the same problem until you figure out how to solve that issue and get over it, and then you can move on with your life. And I feel like we've been doing this over and over so many times until someday we hopefully figure out what we're doing wrong and
Mm.
then we can move forward in, evolution in some way. So,
But do we remember? That's the question I ask. I mean, when we
mm.
implode and explode back out again, when consciousness reforms as we know it, do we remember what happened in the prior universe? I mean, are we first? I mean, how do we know we're the first Big Bang? Maybe we're the 157th. You know what I'm saying? And if we haven't learned by now, I mean, some of the things that human beings do, I think most people could agree. And we, well, hopefully we've advanced, but I'm just wondering if we retain, does Buddhism say that we retain what came prior, or does it start over?
So part of it is our bodies. When we get into a body, they believe that we sort of start all over, right, every time. So we kind of forget our past, but it doesn't mean it's not there. If you work with meditation and through certain techniques, you can go back and remember some of that past and bring that back to your consciousness. But it's really also about realizing these things. I tell you, years ago, for example, one of the exercises that I would do is just grab a book and start writing things without thinking, right? Without being conscious of what I was doing, just let it out. And that was something I learning in film school. I went to the LA Film School, and we're trying to get things from your subconsciousness. And after writing, and I mean a lot, eventually things started to show up. There were some patterns there, and there were some things that I started to realize. Oh my gosh, I've been doing this for so long. Da, 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 da. So, for example, I left high school when I was I think a sophomore, and I went into independent studies because I realized that I'd been going to school so many times before that I was like, okay, I gotta move, different path, and so I didn't go to school until years later, and I did go to school, but I changed it a little bit, and it was definitely different because of what I realized. So there are things like that if you learn them and you change the equation a little bit, the formula of how you live your life, eventually you get a different result. And that's the idea, is to evolve into something better. In Buddhism we talked about the three poisons, which is ignorance, uh, hatred, and attachment. Those three things that we when we do them, they're the things that keep bringing us back, because that desire, that hate, or that the ignorance of not knowing why we keep coming back, is what brings people back into this realm. And same with, sometimes you hear about spirits not, moving on because
Hmm.
they have some kind of attachment, right? They either get attached to a house or they get attached to, certain people, and they just won't leave them. They want to, like your friend that, felt his dad near,
Right.
it's like they won't leave because they feel the need to be there. And so
Yeah.
that attachment is what keeps them coming back and keeps them here. So the idea is eventually when you reach nirvana, you escape that, eternal
Mm.
cycle of lives, and then you can go back to the source, which is basically before everything, started, the Big Bang. So
Yeah, there's a lot of that in, even modern psychology, because I often talk to clients about not being attached to a result. So when they want to advocate for themselves, or they want to communicate or grow, I say, do what you need to do, assert your boundaries, be in touch with what you're feeling, assert your boundaries, but don't be attached to the final result, how things turn out. Be okay with disappointment or sadness or vulnerability or whatever may come up, if that's what comes up with the solution. So move forward, but not expecting simply because you've moved forward, hey, I've done self growth, I should be okay now. Not
mhm.
necessarily, so be okay with it. So lack of attachment, or not lack of attachment, but the curbing of attachment is an important component to this as well. And I like what you said, but also, it's like, is it my friend who's attached to his dad, or is it his dad's spirit who's attached to earth or this plane? Both could be true at the same time. If Because if you remain attached, you'll retain the sensed presence of a possible spirit. And again, who's to say it's true or not true? Because also, some of my clients, for example, never mind clients, people in general, myself included, had imaginary friends when we were kids. What's an imaginary friend? I have one person I know spoke to an imaginary friend from around the age of 3 to around the age of 12. His parents were becoming concerned.
Hmm.
You know, of course, as a therapist, I said, "What is it that had your child want to talk to somebody who wasn't there as opposed to somebody who was?" You know, that's my confrontational, challenging question to the parents. It's okay to have an imaginary friend, but when it went beyond that point, was he more comfortable talking to somebody who he had to make up in his mind? Um, so there's that too. Sometimes that's one of the emotional reasons that we become attached to, the possibility of spirits as well, especially if we live alone, if we're isolated, if we feel emotionally isolated or psychologically wounded, and we haven't, developed enough ways to regulate that with
Mhm.
what's there. We would tend to go to what isn't, or what seemingly isn't,
Yeah.
as a means to do it. Yeah.
I think also there's something that plays out here in culture. I vaguely remember, when I was in school, when I was in abnormal psychology, one of the things we looked into is that, for example, in Japan, a lot of people, believe in spirits. So it's part of their culture. And so when somebody sees spirits or talks to spirits or has imaginary friends, they don't see it as a bad thing or as a schizophrenia like we do here in
Right.
the States. So there's certain things that, like schizophrenia, we wrote that here in the US. This is the thing that we learned. But if you go to Japan, for example, it's totally normal to see spirits in everything. It's part of their one of their religions is Shintoism, and they believe that there's spirits in things, and every atom has a spirit, everything has a spirit. That's what I believe myself, because I do believe that everything is alive. Even things that are not, like a rock and things like that. I believe there's a spirit there. Now, in Buddhism, some people don't believe that. They believe that you can only be a sentient being when you have a consciousness. But I feel like these things have consciousness, except that their consciousness is so undeveloped that you believe they don't have a consciousness. But again, we just haven't figured out a way to know if a rock has consciousness yet, and therefore we say that it doesn't, but we don't know that yet. We might eventually someday realize that, oh my gosh, these atoms do have consciousness, even though they don't think like we do.
Mhm.
There's something there. So that's my belief.
Yeah, and how would we possibly know? Because the only way we can perceive consciousness is through our own consciousness.
Hmm.
So, you know what I mean? We're looking at a rock, determining whether it has a consciousness from our own consciousness, just
Hmm.
like we look at the universe from a very limited consciousness. Perhaps I've heard it said by scientists that perhaps the universe is presenting itself in a way that we could understand. It's like, this is how your perception has grown through consciousness. So this is what we'll show you, or this is what you're being shown based on what your brain can perceive. There could be a lot right in front of us that we can't possibly conceive. And that could be part of what we're sensing as well. And it is great that you bring that up, because even now in modern and postmodern psychology programs, we're being taught, we're being instructed that different cultures throughout the world have different standards for what is considered to be typical. I won't say normal, but typical. And
Hmm.
we discuss religions and cultures and tribes where
Hmm.
spirituality, seeing things, seeing the dead, whatnot, crossing into other planes is considered entirely not only normal but necessary for a
Hmm.
healthy mental perspective. So, and schizophrenia, one difference in schizophrenia is that if a person knows that they're looking at seeing a spirit, if they're seeing something that they can take a step back from. And in schizophrenia, when a person has psychosis, not only do they think they're seeing what they're seeing, they think the whole world should be seeing it too. You know what I'm saying? Or they say it's only for me type of thing. So it's like a singular event, as opposed to there's a spirit right there. I'm perceiving it because it exists, as opposed to there's someone talking to me. You know, and it sort of becomes like a singular event. So a lot of times in schizophrenia, what we've labeled schizophrenia, a person is not saying to the rest of the world, spirits exist, and you have to be sort of relaxed in order to perceive them. They're saying a voice is talking to me, which is sort of a different connotation. They're not saying that they're necessarily spirits from a cultural or religious perspective. It's like that someone is talking to them. You know what I mean? They can actually hear it, and sometimes they're aware that nobody else can, but they're still convinced that spirit's talking to them. Whereas in the religions that you're discussing, it's a known fact that this can happen to everybody, and it does happen to everybody. You know what I'm saying? So there's a little bit of separation in terms of what we deem to be psychosis here. It doesn't seem to be the same thing to me when someone is going through a psychotic episode here, as opposed to somebody from an Eastern religion actually seeing spirits. I don't perceive it the same way. I see a difference, in a slight connotation of the difference between the two of them. You
Yeah,
know,
I think also in schizophrenia, it could also be seeing somebody, right? Like seeing a person in front of you when they're not even there. Um, yeah. So, I see what you mean, and I understand that. But at the same time, I also feel like, and I've dealt with some people that I'm not a psychologist, but some people have brought me people with schizophrenia, and I do believe that sometimes it is what you say, and then sometimes it's also, you know, this people who have this power or perception that they can sense things. Now, uh, there is some research where they found, that people with schizophrenia, their brains are a little bit different now, and I think it's bigger or something. So I there could be something there where they can perceive more than we can. That's one thing. Also, um, in other cultures, there's people who are more perceptive than others. Not everyone can see spirits everywhere. They believe it, but seeing is something that takes a little difference, special eye. And there's people, who are shamans and who can really connect with the spirit world because they can get into the state of mind, where you're just in a deep frequency of the spirit world, and shamanism is basically that, where you can connect with everything and you can sense things. And I've had my experience with shamans in Ecuador, and so experiencing that, ayahuasca in a way, does that too. It puts you in that state, and this is an artificial drug, but I mean, it's a natural drug, but it does cause that, feeling, and that, and I believe there are certain frequencies, right? So we've talked about entrainment, brainwave entrainment, when you can get your brain into a certain frequency. So if you're interested, I have a really good video in one of my YouTube channels where we basically give that frequency to people, where you can get into the spirit world, and if you listen to it for a long time, eventually you become, a little bit more perceptive and start to feel that way. So I think there are many states of being, And it's we're so busy in this country, like, and I can tell you, because I grew up in Mexico, and being in Mexico, like, life is so much more relaxed. You don't have to worry about so many things that we worry about here. We work here all the time, so it's a lot harder to get into those states because you have to pay for rent, you have to, do this and do that, and so we're constantly moving, and so it's that keeps us in a certain, frequency. But if we can relax and put ourselves down into a more relaxing, sensation, then eventually we can reconnect with those things, and with Mother Nature, with, the spirit world, which is completely different than the real world, I guess you could call it.
Yeah, we could all use a little slowing down, you know.
Yes, I agree.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, that's what they say, when the external world becomes a little quieter, we go internal. And if we
Hmm.
go internal, it's interesting because also sometimes, again, not to harp on schizophrenia or psychotic, but also the brain tends to sometimes atrophies. It tends to be shutting down on itself, or cells are dying, neurons are dying. And even so, though, we could make the argument that even if there's atrophy going on, which will affect perception of what a person, perceives, we still don't know, based on that other theory, that our consciousness perceives what it's able to perceive from the universe. So if the brain atrophies, perhaps it's actually improving as opposed to, getting worse,
Yeah,
worsening,
could
because
be.
we don't know. Maybe it's adapting, when they say selective mutation, maybe it's adapting in various people to see other dimensions. The problem is, and I think the important distinction is with psychotic episodes, is that sometimes people do very harmful things to themselves and to other people, when they get into those states. Now, again, it could still be argued that I don't, that may be a calling from some other spirit who may have malintentions. We don't know what the spirits are saying, but nonetheless, that's the danger to us as a society, is that when it becomes dangerous for the person, a person doesn't take care of themselves. Sometimes they won't even feed themselves. They won't bathe themselves. They won't go to a doctor. They'll become hostile. And they might commit crimes or murder. So it's just one of those things where even if it is an improvement, or of atrophy of the brain, there's certain things that during that transition we have to look out for. Whereas I don't see that being an issue with the Eastern traditions. I don't see that. I don't know, but I don't think in those religions you're talking about, or the cultures you're talking about, you often see people acting out or committing murder, or, what I'm saying, becoming dangerous to themselves based on what the spirits are communicating to them. So I think
Yeah.
that might be a very important distinction.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to figure out, to find out, you know, what happens with people like that in other countries. Because, it could also be a thing for, per particular cultures. So, for example, stigmata, remember that, where certain
Yeah.
people get that, the things on their hands. And a lot of times, it's mostly people who are, Catholic, and they, there's all these things that come from that. And I've heard, I think there's been a couple movies where they showed that people who were not Catholic got that too. So it's just weird, like, is it something that only happens when you have this certain belief, and also, when people get, spirits coming to their bodies and they take over and they have to perform an exorcism, and they do this exorcisms, and then this people, get free from whatever spirits they had, and then they feel better after that. So, but again, is it only people who believe in that get those diseases, or,
Mhm.
disorders, or is it something that could happen to anybody,
Yeah, I that's true because I've gone through myself. I've fluctuated through so many different belief systems, in my life,
Hmm.
from completely not believing in it whatsoever to believing in it. Not I wouldn't say entirely. I personally have never actually seen a ghost. Like I think I told you earlier, I've never looked down a hallway and seen a little girl at the end wearing a white dress. You know what I mean? Who
Yeah.
just suddenly disappeared as soon as she saw me. I've never seen that happen. I haven't ever opened my fridge and had some green goo jump out, like in Ghostbusters or whatever it is. I've never had anything like that happen, but I have had sensed presences. I have had a feeling that if I get up and go to walk down the hallway, there's something there. There's someone there, and I don't know what that means. But so I think it fluctuates, and a lot of it has to do with belief.
Hmm.
What you preconceive could be possible, becomes possible. It's very true in life in general. Your core beliefs about yourself and about the world are going to show up. You're going to gather evidence for them, or you're going to see evidence for them, or you're going to cultivate evidence for them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to present the same thing to you that I present to somebody else, and you'll cultivate what you want to believe based on what you already do believe.
Mm-hmm.
And from our own consciousness, that comes from earlier wounds where we developed certain patterns of belief about ourselves and about the world based on certain experiences that we have a template for, and we're looking through a lens, and we don't recognize that we're doing that, and everything that we see becomes colored by that lens, sometimes knowingly, sometimes unknowingly.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever if you were raised to believe or came to believe that it's possible, suddenly it is. you
Mm-hmm.
know and
Yeah.
that's true of anything in life, in terms of self-confidence and creativity, breakthroughs, or sensing something that's is or is not there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This kind of brings it back to the power of the mind. I think our minds are very powerful, and I do believe. I don't know if you ever watched the video by Dan Brown. I think he's a NLP practitioner, but he uses hypnosis, and he has this video on YouTube where he does some voodoo thing, magic on somebody, and this person really feels it, because they believe it so strongly that they can literally feel their bodies in pain, or they can feel the dole as they're sticking the needle in it and things like that. And it's very interesting to me because some people truly believe this with all their heart. They believe in hoaxes, and they believe in people putting spells on them, and they go down this whole thing. And and maybe there's something there, but at the same time, I feel like sometimes your own mind can play tricks on you and can see things that are not there. And so for me, it's always been very important not to use drugs for that same reason, because I want to make sure that when I do experience things like that, that they're real, that they're not just, some thing made up in my mind. And so practicing meditation can really get you to those places. I do believe people who use psychedelic drugs, to
Mm.
awaken certain parts of the brain, they can sense more, because I'm sure that we only use about 10% of our brain capacity. There's so much more to our brain that we can do, and so through meditation, you can activate these other parts of your brain. Same with psychedelic drugs. Some people do that, and they take LSD, and boom, suddenly they can understand everything, right? But it's
Mhm.
only temporarily, because it's a drug, and so it's artificial, and then eventually you crash and you go back to being normal. But some people awaken certain parts of their brains, and they go on a trip, and they stay there for the rest of their lives, which is why I don't do it, and I don't recommend it. But the idea is to be able to do the same through meditation, through going deeper into states of mind that are more profound, through mindfulness, which is becoming more popular nowadays. And there is something there, I can tell you that, but it takes time, and it takes practice, and it takes a lot of concentration to be able to accomplish those states.
Yeah, and also, it's important to point out that in case somebody's listening to this and saying, "Oh, I can do psychedelic drugs or I could do meditation." I know you said you don't recommend it, but I was just watching something on Netflix last night, and the idea, for example, of cocaine, how addictive
Hmm.
cocaine can be. It gives you an immense dopamine rush the first time you take
Hmm.
it. But what the experts were saying is that after you've taken the first time, the huge dopamine rush is very, very, your brain changes
Hmm.
after that happens, and
Yep.
it's very difficult to get the same level of dopamine rush a second time. So you end up taking more of it, which is, causing even more changes to your brain. So these changes are permanent.
Hmm.
So, it could be permanent, and that's why it could be very dangerous. And also, a lot of people take drugs, psychedelic drugs, to escape something, to feel elated, that elated feeling of dopamine rush, that rush of serotonin or dopamine, whatever it's doing, to feel good as opposed to feel present. Meditation will get you present to a lot of other, perceptions, but this drug will do that, but also is supposed to take you away from something else. So
Hmm.
the idea, it's really flipped. Meditation, mindfulness is trying to get you present to what is, to the here and now, whereas drugs are sort of designed to take you away from the here and now, and they end up giving you a much bigger here and now. But you
Yeah.
but and not that I know from experience, I'm just saying, I've never done that, but that's the difference, and I think is important to distinguish in case people are, misinterpreting that message. Oh, I could do either one. No.
Yeah. 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 It's definitely something that is very popular for that reason, because it does work. It does. A lot of people self medicate because they don't want to be in this reality. They don't like this reality. And so I'm just going to drug myself up and forget about it. And weed right now is getting more popular by the day. And because of it, there's more and more people that are becoming homeless, and they're, migrating to other drugs that are even harsher. And, I believe drugs are really going to have a major impact in our society. And they already have. I mean, there's
Mm,
places where there's, people who are dying from heroin addiction, from all this other drugs that are popping up that are even more dangerous. So,
mm,
and again, it's because when you take this drugs, you experience this amazing feelings and this, you have all this awakenings, but they're not, real. It's kind of like, people who are overweight and then they get surgery, and, sometimes it is necessary. I'm not saying it's not, but if you can lose that weight naturally, then eventually you build up the habits and the things that to keep you there. Otherwise, you just get surgery and then your habits are still there. Within months, you go back to your old weight or even more. So
mhm.
same with
Yeah.
drugs. They can awaken you, but then it's not a real awakening. It's just briefly awakened, and then you go back to your old self. So there's nothing really there.
Yeah, that's a good point, because that's one thing I notice a lot in my work is, especially in this generation,
Hmm.
it's the how-to generation.
Hmm.
How do I do that? Wondering if you have any tips for me, or any tools, any techniques. They want a treasure chest full of things to do, and what I say is I can give you tips, and that can bring you down or bring you up, just
Hmm.
like you think psychedelic drugs would do. The idea is you've got to heal. You've got to get to the center. You've got to get to the core. As uncomfortable a process as that might seem to be, if
Hmm.
you don't do that, ultimately, like you just said, as soon as you come down from the high of the techniques that I can give you, unquote, or the worksheets I can give you, unquote, or whatever I can give you,
Hmm.
you're going to go back. And if you don't go back to the same habit, you're going to go back to something else. It's going to manifest in some other way. So you could lose
Hmm.
all the weight and then become, a chain smoker, or become a workaholic, or end up going through three marriages, or, something's going to happen. Something's going to manifest in some way if you don't get to the central core eventually. So that's, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think we're going to end it here. Any last words before we end it today?
Yes, don't do psychedelic drugs. That was not the message of our podcast today. Yeah, and if you do have a sensed presence, ask them what they think about that. Yeah,
Good.
yeah,
Yeah. So I would say also try to, meditate at some point. Most people, the word meditation has, become different, I think, for some people. I would just say, just sit in a quiet place. Just like you said, if you go into nature, see what comes up, see what you can listen to. One of my favorite stories in Zen is this master. This student comes to this master, says, "Master, how can I reach enlightenment?" And the master says, "Can you hear the sound of the river?" And the student says, "Yeah." Start there. And that
mhm,
was the end of it. So then somebody said, "So what if the student would have said no?" And then the master would have said, then start there. So whatever you're going through, just go and start from that point. Just start listening to yourself. That's really what mindfulness is. It's just going inside and seeing what's there. Don't take our word for it. Practice it on your own. See if you can come up with these things without using drugs. Then you'll know if it's real. So thank you
mhm.
for listening. Remember, we're here every Tuesday at 6 p.m. And if you have any questions or concerns, please send them to us, and we'd be happy to respond or talk about this on our show. And thank you to all the people who've been following us for quite some time now. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And also to the people who've been donating. We really appreciate that. And thank you, Neil. And we'll see you next week.
All right. See you next week.
This podcast is brought to you by MindFit. Please help us to share this podcast with your friends and family to grow this community. And if you'd like to donate to this podcast, or if you'd like to share your comments, questions, or concerns, send them to mindfitpodcast@gmail.com, or you can call us directly at 714-328 4661.